And we are live with our 222nd episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on X, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on X. Seth, say hi.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. We are a little bit shifted this week and last week just due to life and other things that are going on, but we're super excited to have a guest of the podcast come back on, Leif come back on after a number of years. We were looking at past episodes and realized it had been 3 years since last time we talked to Leif, and so there's a lot to catch up on. Before we get to that, as far as announcements go, Ken and I will be at LastCon later this week. We'll be doing an episode of the podcast live, State of AppSec, right? Or State of Absolute AppSec, whatever you want to call it, right? On stage on Friday. It'll be a panel. We're going to do our best to stream it out live. If we can't get it streamed during the conference, then we will post it later. On top of that,
who's on the panel?
Who's on the panel?
What celebs do you have on the panel?
I have a couple people I'm trying to.
Yeah.
No, I have a couple people I'm trying to lock down, but we haven't solidified 100%. So keeping it a little bit of a surprise.
Yeah. We'll have to post that, right? Like it'll solidify here in the next couple of days, though. It's been more.
Yeah, the topic.
Go ahead, Ken. Sorry.
I'm having like some weird latency, I think. Sorry. Anyways, last time we did this, by the way, 3 years ago, my screen was completely like crapping out. I had to switch locations.
Oh, yeah.
Just apropos that, of course, it's happening again. No. I was just going to say, it's sort of the last time we did this, we sort of got a take from everybody on what's brought us to this point. What can we improve on them? Where do we think things are going? A lot of ideation, just kind of looking for creative solutions, things like that. So we'll walk through a lot of that kind of stuff, just the general AppSec world.
Yeah. I mean, Matt Johansson's in Austin. Could maybe get him on if you want to allow a vendor shill. Evan Johnson has started a company. He's in Austin, so could potentially pull those guys on there.
Yeah. We had Evan on not too long ago talking about Run Reveal and what he's doing over there. So it's an interesting use case, right? Seems to be fairly effective. But I mean, outside of that, Ken will be at AppSec USA next week. Sadly, I'm not going to make that.
I'll be there too.
No, you will be as well. Cool. Awesome.
Yeah. And we're SimGrup's hosting a party with a few other vendors, including like Impart Security and Pangea. So that's Sunday night.
Nice.
We had Brian Joe on from Impart Security sometime back, actually, as a matter of fact. So it's I think, right? Was it? Am I crazy?
Yep. No, you're not. Yeah, you're right.
I could send the link if you want to add it to the show notes.
Sure.
Yeah. Heck yeah. Actually, I'd like to sign up for that and register and show up too. It'd be fun.
Sign up.
So you want to hold off? Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
What's that?
So do you want me to hold off on posting it then until you are actually like available, right?
So I can make it.
So you can make it before it,
It's fine. Thank you.
Cause a run on the happy hour.
No, that's awesome, dude. I'll see you then. It'll be nice to catch up in person for sure. Doing booth duties though, so should be.
Yeah,
I don't know, like
duty as well.
I don't know how you feel about that, but like, so here's, I'll just put it out there. And then if any of this sounds familiar, tag along and you can not be the bad guy. But for me, like of course I like talking about our product. Of course I like meeting people, but 8 straight hours is very, very taxing. It's very, very difficult, especially you're mostly on your feet the entire time. So while, I look forward to talking to some folks and all that, I know it's going to be exhausting.
Yeah,
but maybe for you, it's not as.
We're a bigger company, So we don't have to do a full 8-hour shift. I do like a half day each day, which is a lot more manageable.
Much more manageable. That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's the way to do it. That's the smart way to do it. No, yeah, I'm sure we'll break it up, but it's just it's long days. But yeah, it should be a good time to catch up with people. It's cold. Just where are you at now? Like physical location.
I'm in New York, so about the same as DC weather-wise.
That's fair. Yeah. Well, yeah. Keep a jacket. Seth, you
It's
don't
no
have to worry
AppSec
about it.
Alley.
I miss AppSec Alley. Are they not doing that anymore?
Yeah, it died during COVID.
And are there any rumblings of it coming back, or just it's over?
Yeah, I think it's over. I mean, I think it is like a revivable idea, but you'd need to get people on board with all the effort that goes into putting a conference on, which is quite a lot. But I think there's still a market for it for sure. Like,
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting to see like which conferences have kind of faded away, or which brands of them is post COVID. And I don't know, right? Like there's still quite a bit of activity. I mean, from the Hacker Tracker stuff, we still see quite a few B-sides events and other things, but there has been a shift in different places. There haven't been as many conferences, especially focused like on AppSec, or some of the more focused conferences, I guess I should say. But we'll see if it comes back. I mean, I feel like there's a definite need there. I think Global AppSec next year, isn't there a San Francisco edition? I believe there is.
they just bought back and forth between SF and DC.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, at least that one will be coming back, but I still miss the nice January, February visit to California, right?
Yeah, it has some of the best weather in the country during that time of year.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Annandale Beach House is a terrible place to hang out when it's
terrible.
Yeah.
There is also nice. some organizer global OWASP beef that I'm not going to get into, but that was also like a contributing factor that led to it not making a comeback.
Yeah.
No, there's no drama in OWASP. Everybody gets along well, no issues there. No, yeah, we've seen a lot of it the last year. I feel like it's been even more dramatic, by the way. But yeah, so I did want to kind of get into, by the way, it's been 3 years. Lots obviously happened during that time because we were talking about it just before we hopped on. So you were an individual contributor at that point. Later, you took on a engineering manager role. You all were acquired. Segment was acquired by Twilio. And then since then, obviously, you've moved on to SemGrep as well. So yeah, just I guess like, at the last point at which we kind of caught up with you, if you could just like start walking us through what all has really like, what was first, let's just start with the IC to EM transition, and then maybe we can go into the acquisition bits. I'm sure if there's anything you wanted to share at all there.
Yeah, sure. So I'll rewind a little bit just because I think you were probably the only person that went back and re-listened to the other episode. I assume the listeners haven't and either didn't listen originally or have forgotten in the last 3 years. But yeah, so I originally joined Segment in 2017. I was a pretty early person to join the security team just in general. And it was mostly focused on application security. So doing bug bounty stuff, pen testing, fixing some vulns in the app, doing training, that kind of stuff. And then I got more interested in actually helping build out security features. But at the time, there was no team that was specifically tasked with doing this. So I was mostly just partnering with other teams and helping them build it. So helped build out multi-factor authentication, also helped build out SCIM, which is something that sits on top of single sign-on and allows you to do management of like groups and adding people and removing people to the app. It's a very, very useful thing to add if you're a B2B SaaS app. And then I had kind of helped enough teams like build stuff that it was like, well, there's enough area of ownership now that you could just like create a team and just kind of take back all of this stuff that you've helped add and like make enhancements and like go do other things. So we did a lot of authentication related work, but we also did some pretty cool work around API keys. So we, in addition to getting onboarded with the GitHub secret scanning thing to detect segment API keys in public repos, we also built some stuff actually on top of segment itself to show the last time an API key was used. I found that's something that a lot of apps don't do that's really helpful. And then we also have some stuff in there that is like, oh, this was like who it was created by. And then if it's exposed, not only will we send you an email saying like, hey, we detected this on GitHub or GitLab, but we'll also revoke it and that kind of stuff.
It's funny you mentioned that. Actually, I had a situation about a month, specifically the API key usage. I did have within, I don't know, we'll say the last 4 weeks, I had a situation just like that where I was like, I couldn't find out when it was last used. And I'm like, I really need to know when this is last used. Not from a security perspective. It was like kind of troubleshooting, but yeah, kind of strange that didn't exist, but cool. So you got,
Like,
so basically, oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's like not the easiest thing to build. Like it's a very obvious thing to build, I think, but it actually like we had to put in some actual engineering thought to like how you actually build it. It's not as simple as like keeping track in a database or something every time the key gets used, because if you did that, you'd just be updating the database a ton when somebody makes like 120 calls in a minute or something like that. It's like you don't actually need to update all of those. So what we would do is we would write it to segment itself using a segment tracking event that was like, hey, this API got used. And then once a day, we'd go back and see which API keys had been used and then use that to update. We didn't actually update on every single use. It was just like, hey, it was used yesterday or it was used, 2 days ago or 5 days ago. But you would need something like you could write it probably to like Redis or something like that too, like something that's just out of the path. And it's not like an insane undertaking, but I think it is something that's, when you're building the API, if you don't think about doing it, it gets harder to add later, because then what do you tell customers about the usage? You're like, oh, it's actually unknown usage because we weren't always tracking this and stuff. And so I think it's a little bit more complicated than people think. But yeah, it is something that would be nice, especially
It's
when
kind of something
API
we talk.
key gets leaked and you're like, oh, are we actually using this thing? Do we need to actually go figure out where it was used? Or like, oh, this thing, was part of, a CI provider breach, but we haven't actually used this token in like 2 years. So like, we don't need to figure out where it's used and roll it and that kind of stuff.
Not easy, but very, very, very useful. And it probably opened your eyes. And actually, you talked about this a little bit the last time, how you had a realization, like you were kind of saying, things that you thought were simple tweaks, simple updates, simple fixes. As you had gotten into more and more engineering and to put something into production, you're like, oh no, it's actually a lot of work that goes behind and a lot of factors to consider when you're making those tweaks or those little fixes. Nothing's ever. You actually said that you had an engineer who always repeated, no fix is a small fix.
Yeah, it's never a quick fix. Even if you have a good engineering culture and you have like fast CI and like, maybe you even have like, it's easy to spin up development environments. Like that's one thing that's really nice at SemGrep is like, it's really, you can create a dev stack super easily. But it's like, even if you have all those things, like it still takes time just to put up the PR, get it reviewed, answer questions, like make sure it works. Like even something that's quick, is probably an interruptible half day at minimum, unless it's something that's like urgent and you can just be like, I need you to look at this right now and like get it out there.
For you, is that kind of the metric for like what a product security person is like building in sort of security tooling and security products? I'm asking because we've had that question a bunch of times in our Slack and on our chats, and we've gotten various different answers from different people as to what they consider ProdSec versus AppSec. So I don't know if you had gained any insights as an IC and EM in that role that kind of left
I
you
don't
with some
know what
opinions
the
there.
answer is, honestly. Like we originally had at Segment, we originally had the definition of like, okay, product security is like actually building security features in the product, mostly because we were friends with y'all at GitHub, and that's the name that you used, and we just stole it. And then we had AppSec, which was kind of the more like, I would say, traditional definition. Like, I don't think there's a lot of debate on what the definition of AppSec is. You know, it's like
Neither.
comparatively to product security. Like, there's way more debate on like what is ProdSec than like what is AppSec, at least in my experience. And so we had like I would say a pretty traditional definition of like what AppSec is up to. I actually soured on that name though for using product security, because I found that when it was time to do recruiting, I would get a bunch of consultants that, you know, had never written any production code before. Like, they were basically looking for an AppSec role, and I don't really blame them. I mean, there's tons of companies that like use product and AppSec like pretty interchangeably, but it really made like attracting the right types of people to apply pretty difficult. And so after the first person I hired for the team, I swapped to just posting like security software engineer, and the results were a lot better. And like, I don't know that it really matters like what you call the team internally, as long as it's descriptive and people know what you do. But I felt like in terms of the role title, security software engineer was a much better fit than product security engineer.
So expanding on that, I mean, what were some of the qualifications you were looking for in folks that did that or that filled that role?
So I wasn't willing to compromise on the engineering side. Like, you needed to be somebody that could write code and like had written code and like ideally the languages that we were using at Segment, which is full stack TypeScript. Was willing to compromise on that like for the right candidate. But they had to be interested in security. I didn't actually care if they had actually worked on security features before. Obviously, it was a huge plus if you're somebody who had built SSO before, built MFA before, had done like a lot of identity work or, you know, whatever. But I think the good software engineers are smart, and it's like you can teach them this stuff. Like, software engineers build stuff that they've never built before all the time. Like, you're never going to find somebody who's like, oh yeah, we need somebody who's built this exact thing. And so I kind of just took that approach when I was hiring. It's like interested in security, but like strong background in software engineering.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's interesting that was the reaction, right? Because I mean, we've always said, or we said for a number of years, that the best, you know, product security or even AppSec, you know, engineers come from a software background. And it might just be a mindset thing. It doesn't mean that we don't get a lot of talented people from other avenues, but definitely in roles where you're looking to build security into a product, right? Like, I don't think I would look specifically at AppSec first for that role, right? I'd probably be looking at software engineers or people to transition into it.
Yeah. I mean, we were building features of the production Segment product.
Like,
and they're features that are really, really important to get right. Like, if you mess up, you know, your SCIM implementation, it could be very, very bad in terms of giving people access to stuff that they shouldn't. And so I really think that it's important to have talented software engineers on that kind of stuff. Even if I was hiring for, you know, a traditional AppSec team, I don't know that I would hire anybody who can't at least write a simple script. Like, I wouldn't expect them to write production quality code. But if you can't, you know, call the SemGrep API, get the findings out, and like put it into Snowflake or something like that, you know, unless it's like a super entry level like position, I just think that there's so many things that you can make faster through automation. And it doesn't matter if you're like a super good coder. Like, if you're asking ChatGPT to help you with this stuff, but you can go through and figure it out and write tests and, you know, deploy it and like get it working, I think that that's like a totally fine bar. But yeah, I do think that for like the technical roles within security, like, you're just at such a disadvantage if you can't put together like basic stuff. And it's like, maybe that doesn't apply if you're like a manager or like, you know, there's some other like niche role. that it doesn't apply to, that's totally fine. But yeah, I do think if you're like an AppSec or a CloudSec person, like you got to be able to do at least
Yeah.
some like basics.
Yeah. And I mean, that's been a discussion point multiple times, right, Ken? Like what level of coding is required to be in application security. We've always said it's, if you're trying to do anything in the AppSec space and you don't know how to read code, that's probably the first thing you'll want to do is, brush up on that. Because otherwise we just don't know what people are actually going. I just don't know what you would do, right? I guess you could run Burp Suite a little bit with, I don't know, right? Like I struggle because it's been such in all of our backgrounds, right? Like that's such a relevant piece of what we use on a daily basis and how we think about the work that we do, that I don't know how someone could even function without at least a baseline understanding of what you're talking about, Leif, right? Like, hey, I take this data, I munge it, and I do something else with it, right? Yeah. Did you see people that were coming into your roles then without that experience or applying?
There was nobody that made it very far in our process that couldn't do some, like, again, super basics. Like I'm not expecting you to be like a production quality engineer, but that was something that was part of all the people that reported to Eric, which was CloudSec, AppSec, and ProdSec. Like part of it was writing some simple code just to make sure that you could do some like basic stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah. It makes sense, right? So that was your time at Twilio. I guess we haven't really talked about your move from, being an ICE into, management. Like how did that progress? What was the differences in like your day to day? That would be interesting to hear.
Like, did
Yeah.
someone ask you to become a manager, or I'm actually,
Yes,
Can
Eric.
you also talk about that? Like, did someone approach you and recruit you for that, or what?
Yeah, so it's something that Eric, who's been on the show as well, had asked about a few different times, and I was like, "Hey, I want to keep progressing down the IC path." And then finally, I told him, I was like, "Hey, I'm willing to give this a shot. Like, I feel like I know enough about security and writing software, and Segment as a business and that kind of thing." And it was really a great transition overall because, like, to start, I just had one person who was reporting to me, and so I was still doing quite a lot of IC work, but also helping this person who had just been promoted from like IC1 to IC2 grow as an engineer. And then I was also chartered with building out a team. And so I kind of just gradually, like, the more time I spent on hiring and like the more people I brought onto the team, the less IC work that I would do. And I would still go in and like fix stuff here and there, or like, go in and help people write up a plan to solve something and kind of walk them through the code and be like, "Hey, here's like the stuff that you need to change, and roughly like this is what you're trying to accomplish." And then they'd go in and actually do the work and that kind of stuff. So I still felt pretty competent within the Segment code base, like even when I left. And at that point, I think I had been a manager for a little bit over 2 years. So I thought that was a good way to do it, especially because I got to hire everybody on my team too. So I didn't inherit a team at all.
I will say that is, I feel like especially if, I don't know, it's for everybody, it's a huge benefit if you can just hand pick the team versus what you said, which is coming in later and then you don't know what dynamics already existed. I mean, you sometimes hear horror stories about, stuff that you kind of have to deal with because, there's just someone moved on. They didn't really deal with those team dynamics. But yeah, that's a really awesome, especially though, if you're newer to the transition, great way to do it.
Just really helpful to have all the context of being an IC at the same company. Like pretty much everything that my team owned was something that I had helped build. And so that was really nice for me because I could focus on more of like the people aspects of being a manager, and I didn't have to try to understand the context of Segment as a business or like the stuff that we owned within Segment. Like I had already been there for 3 years. I was already pretty, well connected within the company. And then when people had questions or I was onboarding somebody new, I could come up with like, hey, like, let's actually walk through this stuff together, and like, you can take notes and kind of come up with a plan to do some of these onboarding tasks. And felt like I was able to review the design docs and be like, hey, like, maybe we should change this up a little bit, or like, what, could you explain this part? Like, it's unclear to me. And I didn't feel like I was really bogging anyone down by having them explain a bunch of stuff. Like, they could usually pretty quickly get me up to speed because I was already familiar with enough of the things in our domain. So I think that was really helpful for me personally. I think now at this point that I've been a manager for a while, I think I would be fine like going to another company and just like not being an IC first and like not being super familiar with the code base. But yeah, for the first time, I mean, it was really, really helpful to be able to have that background.
Yeah, no, and I mean, like during that process, did you learn? Yeah, I mean, did you kind of? What's your thoughts on EM versus IC? Is basically where I'm going. Like for you, not like for everybody, but what was your
Yeah.
experience? Like, do you have a preference, or is it just more of a pros and cons situation? Both equally have their role or like value for you.
Yeah. I mean, I really like being an IC. I mean, I've had a lot of fun actually building stuff, and like, I think the reward of solving problems with code is pretty high for me. But the thing that was great about being an EM at Segment was there was a bunch of things that we had been talking about, some literally for years, that we just never had time to do. And so once I hired a handful of people, like, there was a ton of people to work on stuff, and I, mostly knew what they needed to be working on. I could help them work on it if they had questions. I could review pull requests and things like that. And so it was great getting to help all these people get onboarded to a company that I was already pretty familiar with, and have them execute on stuff that had been a known good idea for a while. It just hadn't been above the cut line anytime that we went to go and work on it.
Okay. Makes sense, right? Like, yeah, it's a fine line to walk, right? Like, and it takes some talent to move between those positions. So like doing that at, Twilio, and then, moving over to Segment now, right? What is
SemGrep.
how, whoa. Yeah, sorry about that. Right,
Segment and SemGrep are way too
really
similar.
close. Yeah, exactly. That's what I meant. To SemGrep, right? And SemGrep, Ken and I talk about it quite a bit, right? But
We recommend it all the time.
yes, exactly. But like, what has that been like? What is your position over at SemGrep? How has that been? I know SemGrep has grown quite a bit. Like when we look at Clint and Tanya and everybody else that's kind of starting to aggregate around that company. What is it that you're doing over there? How was that transition? What spurred it for you?
Yeah, so there was a combination of things. I had been at Segment for about 5.5 years, which is pretty good run. And 2.5 of those were post Twilio acquisition. And I was just ready to kind of go to a smaller company where I could just get stuff done faster. And SemGrep is about the same stage as Segment when I joined. It's a little bit earlier, but not a ton. And I just know that for me personally is a really fun time to be at a company like slightly after Series C. Like, you obviously have customers that really love your product at that point. But it's also still early enough to have a meaningful impact on the company. Whereas at a company the size of Twilio, as an engineering manager, like, there's I don't even know how many engineering managers there are. There's probably like 500 of them, or maybe not that many, maybe 250 of them or something. Whereas at SemGrep, there's like 4 of us or 5 of us, or 6 or something like that. So you can just like have such a big impact on the trajectory of the company. And so I was being pretty like thoughtful with where I invested time in terms of like research and interviewing. I wasn't interviewing at too many places. but one of the other ones I was interviewing at the time is Pangea, who I mentioned earlier. We're co-sponsoring a party with them. They're doing some really cool stuff in the product security space using the GitHub segment definition of product security. They're basically trying to be your outsourced security features. And so they have like auth-n, auth-z, audit logging, secure file upload, like all that stuff. Like they're just trying to make it so that if you're building a SaaS app, like all that stuff is turnkey.
Calm down, Seth. I could see the excitement in your
Audit
face when you mentioned it.
But yeah, that and SemGrep were like the two that I was looking at. And I just love SemGrep's relationship with the community. Like anytime that you're at a conference, like there's so many people that come by the booth and are like, we love SemGrep, you know, we use it. Like even if they're not a paying customer, they're just using the open source one. Like they always want to come by and talk to us and hear what we're up to and get swag. And you'll look over at the other companies and there's like nobody there. They're like begging people to come and talk to them. And I feel like there's very few security companies that the community actually really, really likes. And so when I had the chance to join one of them, that was something that was pretty important to me as somebody who's done a lot of conference organizing and meetup organizing and stuff. Like I really appreciate the community's sentiment towards SemGrep, and you know, it's solving a real problem. There's a lot of stuff that or a lot of companies that can use SemGrep to help improve their security.
Is it accurate that I had heard this through the grapevine that was it two guys from MIT basically, or maybe a few from MIT three, yeah. So, but I think that they originally started off with I don't even know what I forget anyways what the original product idea was. It took them a little while to kind of, which man, I see how that goes. Where you kind of like test the waters, kind of find and then you're like, boom, this is the thing we're going to build. And it, is that accurate? It sounded like they started off on a different direction and pivoted kind of to this, and this is what they landed on. And people, I mean, I know this is useful because we recommend it in our course. We recommend it on here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's honestly a very similar story to Segment, which is kind of crazy because it's in both cases, it's three guys from MIT who had a couple of like pivots and then ended up landing on something that has been pretty successful so far. So yeah, that's definitely true for SemGrep.
What's neat about it, I think personally, I can't speak for the community, but I think one thing that it makes really to date, it's been pretty hard to like obviously customize. First of all, you got the vendor lock-in thing, and so like customizing their tools, you're locked into their tools, and if you want to write rules, it's kind of onerous if you can even get what you need supported and all this stuff. And then SemGrep comes along, is like, hey, you know, this is a huge list of languages we support. We just you know, we don't. It's not just like regex. I mean, there is some AST parsing going on, and it allows you to like quickly, you know, find a language that you're supported with, and then like go build a rule. You have a playground. There's existing community rules. It's just, I don't know. I feel like it's really empowered people to just kind of build their own, not really a SaaS, but kind of, I mean, honestly, yeah, a SaaS-ish. I mean, pretty good SaaS product, you know, for themselves.
Yeah. I mean, that's the way that most people do it is they go and look at the rules that exist and adapt them until they get good enough to like write a rule from scratch. But yeah, it's great for doing custom stuff that might only be applicable to your org. Like let's say that you're migrating from one thing to do authorization to another thing to do authorization. You could write a SemGrep rule pretty easily for your language. It's like, hey, we see that you're using this old auth-z library. You're supposed to be writing everything in this new one. Go do that. Or like, hey, we saw that you created a route in Flask that doesn't have an auth-z check. Like you need to either have a comment saying like why you don't have that, or you need to have one. And stuff like that's going to be custom to every organization. So
yeah, that's 100% true.
Well,
like you guys have all worked. I mean, you guys have all worked, you know, in a plethora of different spots where it's like, yeah, every app is different, and you do need to customize quickly. And that's where I was kind of saying, like, it's just hard to do that with existing vendor tools, and you're limited in what they support and all that stuff. So yeah, it's really. Sorry, Seth. What were you gonna say?
No, I was going to say it takes me back to the old days of what O2 for ounce and some of the Fortify rules that you can write, but it was so difficult to do, right? Like just the understanding of how the product function was such a piece of, hey, now I'm going to customize it that no one ever would, right? As opposed to, oh, like that it's kind of a natural progression with SemGrep is you drop out of the rules that are available pretty quickly when you start talking about custom apps that you've written and what you want to enforce. But it's so easy to go in and play at the playground and everything else. There's a reason why we're so high on it, right? And I think, Leif, to your point, there's a reason why the community has jumped on it so much is because it is so flexible and it feels like the old, almost, hacker style app that you can use to really build something unique for your specific environment, right? Yeah, so it's super approachable anyway.
Yeah.
So I did want to like go back though. So when you chose to join, did you have in mind with them like a specific thing that you were joining to build, or was it sort of more of just like you're in the right place as a company, people are supporting you culturally, obviously there's traction here, and I can still have like it's the golden that golden kind of time where I get to make impactful changes. But on top of that, was there anything like you're like, oh yeah, like I definitely want to go here for a specific reason?
Yeah, I'd say it was a combination of both. Like one of the things that I appreciated is the fact that they are encouraging for, if I want to spend time writing a blog or like speaking at a conference or helping one of our founders put together a dinner. Like one of our founders was in New York last week and they're like, hey, a bunch of people, like invite people that are smart and fun to hang out with to a dinner. And I like being able to do a bunch of that stuff. Whereas, at a bigger company, they might want you to be a little bit more focused on like just doing whatever the like EM description is. And then in terms of like what to work on, I didn't join to do a specific thing. There were a handful of ideas that mostly sounded pretty good to me when they were talking about like stuff I could work on. And then kind of over the first 2 months, as the company did some more research and kind of talked to me about like what I was interested in, like we landed on something. But yeah, like the first thing I built was an integration with Jira, Linear, and Asana. Because they didn't have that, and that's something that like every security company ends up building at some point. And so they were like, "Yeah, you've you've used these. I had never built one before, but it's like I've used a lot of security tools. I've seen like what is good and bad with ticketing integrations and that kind of stuff. So that was like the first like big project I worked on. And then maybe like 2.5 months in, they're like, hey, let's do a secrets product and we'll have you lead that and like kind of borrow some people from throughout the organization because like there was no secrets team. It was just like me who had just joined like 2 months ago and had been doing IC work and then
You
just
got to assemble
bringing
the A
people in.
team.
Yeah, like Lewis Ardern, who's been a guest on here, I'm
Oh,
pretty sure. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
he was kind of like one of the people who originally advocated for a secrets project, like way before I even joined the company. And so he kind of helped us from like the security research side. He did a lot of the rule writing and like that kind of stuff. And then we got help from people on the program analysis team. So that's like a separate team that actually like writes the SemGrep engine itself. And then I did a decent amount of like the full stack work, but we got help from like a ton of people like throughout the company that all pitched in to do like sometimes they just do like one thing, like they just come in and be like, oh, I need you to like write this one piece of this functionality. And then there were other people that were kind of on the team for like a couple of months, and then I ended up hiring somebody that I worked with at Segment who joined just under 3 months ago at this point probably, and he's just absolutely killed it so far. I don't know if you've met him, Sal. He gave a talk at B-Side San Francisco like 2 years ago. But yeah, he's just come in and like done a ton of great work so far. So yeah.
May have met Sal. I think sounds familiar.
Yeah, he gave a talk about all the like API stuff that I was talking about earlier. So he was the one who did a lot of that like API work to make it visible to customers about like, uh, when was the last time the thing was used. He worked with the folks at GitHub and GitLab to like help them protect the API keys. But let me see, Sal's segment blog. I can post a blog, into the comments here. But yeah, this is a blog that Sal wrote earlier this year that kind of walks through all the stuff that we've done on the API key side. And then on the secret side, we're actually going with like a public beta tomorrow. And so if people want to sign up for the public beta, there's a link too. And someone from the sales team will reach out to you about your secrets needs. So be warned if you fill out the form.
Be warned. We're all used to that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I posted the link to the blog that's talking about SemGrep secrets, what's going on there. So yeah, I mean, again, it feels like a pretty cool, like natural progression of what SemGrep is doing, recognizing where the secrets live. And then, I mean, can you talk more about like what's going on after the fact there? Like what the other features are that are useful with that, outside of just like, oh, I see that this is being used as a password or as a secret, right? What else is it that you're doing there?
Yeah, so the thing that's nice about building something like secrets at this point in SemGrep's life cycle is there's enough stuff that already exists that it wasn't like we had to start from zero. Like as you would expect, we're using the SemGrep engine to identify the secrets. And so we didn't really have to write anything major to be like, oh, we need to identify that something matches this pattern. Like SemGrep's been able to do that for a really long time. And then you also benefit from any of the semantic rules. So that's actually what SemGrep stands for, semantic grep, as opposed to syntactic grep. And so you can actually follow a variable, moving throughout the code and going into something that looks like a MongoDB connection string or something like that. Like that's the example from the blog, which a simple regex might not be able to figure out, that it's like, hey, this thing didn't come from a config. It came from just a local variable, and then you put it into a connection string, and that's bad. Whereas bringing it in from the environment is fine. But that's still like kind of before, I guess, in terms of what happens after. The main thing that we do is the validation. So a lot of other tools in the secret space do this, but we'll actually make an innocuous call to an API to see if the secret is actually valid. In a lot of cases, we don't have validation rules for every secret that we have a detection rule for, but we'll call like Slack or GitHub or whatever, and just see if the API key is valid. Because if it's valid, you obviously care a lot more about like, hey, this is my code base. I need to go and see where this is used and rotate it and do all that stuff. So yeah, that's like the main thing that we do like after the fact is do the validation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was my question, because it, from again, like you were saying, right? Like from a rule perspective, some of that feels like it's, it's stuff that you can write, but the validation, the ease of use there, will definitely be advantageous, right? So similar to what GitHub was doing with like some of the, we know that this is a key for AWS or whatever it is. Like we're going to actually go invalidate it, or we're going to, tell someone about it. Have you gone to that level as well? Or is it just like validation of whether or not the key is useful?
Yeah, so we don't do any sort of like revocation of the keys, because that requires you to actually build an integration with whoever creates the key. So we'd actually have to build an integration with Segment, Twilio, Slack, blah, 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 to automatically do that. We just tell our customers like, hey, this thing is, valid or invalid, and then they can go and like take whatever the appropriate action is there. I also think that probably makes more sense if the key is in a public repo, whereas a lot of times if it's in a private repo, like I wouldn't want that to get revoked immediately, because the risk is actually, probably okay for at least some period of time, versus the downside of actually going and breaking stuff. I think
Yep.
this is kind of like, a good security versus headache trade-off, where it's like, we don't want to revoke a key that gets committed to a private repo, because if it's used for something, it could break something that like actually matters. Like, as long as we're actually going and dealing with that quickly, I think that is a good, trade-off.
Makes sense. Yep.
So yeah.
Yeah. Meanwhile,
Did wanna
Ken's
just-
got code. There we go. Yep.
I just wanted to show the viewers real quick an explanation of what you're talking about. So instead of like taking a string and looking for, like grepping for the results of a string and seeing if it matches, some sort of pattern, instead what Leif is talking about here is you can kind of interrogate like, hey, this is a variable of some kind, right? And so this is ASTExplorer.net. For JavaScript, they have this sort of same type of thing for most languages and like online editors, so you can play with it. But yeah, just paste some code in there. You can see how it's kind of broken out. This is, sort of like what an not sort of, and this is what an abstract syntax tree looks like. And you can start doing what Leif just said. There's like convenience libraries that you can say like, is this variable an expression statement, and if so, where is it being passed into? Does it match this kind of pattern? What's its name? Things like that. So anyways, something to play with. It's kind of cool to see how it all gets broken down, how code gets broken down into an abstract syntax tree and all its nodes there.
Yeah. And I think kind of touching back on one of the things that you mentioned from last time, Ken, of like, there's always like more stuff than that meets the eye when you're thinking about code. That's definitely super true when building a product too, as I'm sure you're aware as somebody who's building a product as well. But like, a perfect example of this is, you might be thinking, well, like, SemGrup code could detect secrets. Like, why do we need like another secrets like view within SemGrup? Like, a perfect example of this is like, what is the definition of fixed? Like, for a SQL injection finding, it probably just means, does the default branch for your repo have that finding or not? Whereas for a valid secret, it doesn't matter if the secret is no longer in the code base. Deleting the secret doesn't affect the validity of the secret. And so you actually want to have a different definition of what fixed is. Like, you either want to see something go from valid to invalid, or you want to have the customer say like, hey, I manually rotated this if it's something that doesn't have a validation rule. And so there's just a lot of little like nuanced things that kind of add up and add up and add up to the point where you're like, hey, these things are different enough that like, yeah, we can use some of the same building blocks, but we actually need to give people a new way to manage like this type of information.
Yeah,
Well,
there's
and
no easy fixes, right?
Yeah, there's no easy fixes. It's always harder. It's
There is
always
value
harder than you
too.
think, and if you don't, and if not, it means you might not have done enough research and you broke something.
Meanwhile, we keep cutting Ken off. What were you going to say, Ken?
No. Oh, no, not at all. I think it's the opposite. No, I was just saying, like even how GitHub does it, because they do send to specific API endpoints a message for revocation. They worked closely with at least originally a handful of vendors. I don't know. I do believe they have some level of custom secret scanning, but my point is like, it's not a one size, and also not everybody uses GitHub. So it's not like a one-stop shop. Also, like, yes, maybe this company over here is dedicated to doing that, but they don't have like the entire, all the ecosystem bits that you need. And maybe you just want to go to one, because procurement's always easier through one vendor. So totally. I don't know, like, I think it's good to have, you already have like a good ecosystem, just build on something that is naturally already, you're seeing there's product market fit for, because people are paying money for that kind of service.
Yeah. I mean, people were already using SemGrup to find secrets. And people, I'd agree with you. People generally want to have one vendor that does more things well. And I think, unfortunately, the case is that in a lot of cases does not happen. And so I understand why there's point solutions and like, specialized vendors that do like one thing super well, but if you're already a SEMGRUP customer, we're already scanning all of this stuff. And it's going to be easier to use the suite of products that are all like designed to work together. Hashtag by SEMGRUP. But like, I think that is kind of like, that's the value prop, right? Is it's like, it's not the secrets product on its own. It's like the secrets product is part of a platform.
Part of everything else. Yeah. Well, I mean, so along those lines, right? Personally, and then also professionally, like what is it that you're looking at next, right? Like what is it that you're excited about, right? Either, right? Like obviously the secret stuff is in beta now, that's coming down the pipe. But is there anything else like on the personal side that has you excited for, the next 6 to 12 months?
Personal side. I mean, I don't really have anything else like planned in terms of like conference talks or like anything like that. I'm just been kind of moving back and forth between like LA and New York, which has been really fun on the personal side, getting to kind of experience the best of both there. But yeah,
Can you clarify that? Are you saying that are you just traveling to like, kind of like I do? I go to Austin a lot because that's like where a good portion of my team's at. But or are you saying you're literally like living in both places?
Yeah, like my girlfriend and I, the last like couple of years, we've been doing like chunks of time in each where we like don't have a second residence. It's like fully moving. Like from it, the places are all furnished, but like so we've just been like bringing checked bags and stuff. But yeah, like we're in New York right now for 6 months. Before that, we were in LA for like 8 months. Before that was New York for 6 months. So the last like couple of years, we've just been doing like half and half roughly.
That is,
which has been fun.
What's that like? Is it fun? It is actually fun to like experience a short period. I can imagine why though, because you get to like kind of enjoy. It's kind of like if you're somewhere for very long, you kind of all the stuff that gets the paper cuts, the stuff that gets annoying does add up. But if you're only there for a few months, I can see how it's like, nah, just only the good stuff, and then you move on.
Yeah, I mean, New York is just so fun. Like there's so much stuff going on and it's so dense and just like being able to get around with the subway is so nice. But then on the flip side, like we've been spending the winters in LA, which obviously like beats New York winter in terms of weather. And we're both from California, and so it's a lot easier to like see friends and go to important life events and that kind of stuff. So it is really nice to have time in California as well.
Cool.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Eric on Slack said that you should just stay in New York City and do karaoke at Wogie's. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Weekly.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I didn't do karaoke with him, but did hang out with him at Wogie's.
Sweet. Cool. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I've always like wondered how that would be to, migrate. Like I had a friend recently that was going through that was doing almost van life, right? Like had a camper, and him and his partner have been just on the road for the past 3-4 months, and that's it, right? Like working out of his camper.
For me.
That's too much moving.
Yeah. Like just the uncertainty of like, oh, is the internet going to work? Are we going to like have a place to go? Like, I feel like there's too much like planning just to make sure that like things that need to happen. Whereas if you do 6 months and you are living somewhere that's furnished and you have, a few checked bags, it's like, it's not that much of a hassle. I mean, we spend some time putting stuff in storage in LA, obviously spend some time packing. But once we get here, I mean, you need to order some stuff on Amazon just to kind of like fill out whatever you need. But at least for us, like you're kind of set like after a few days. Like it's not a super disruptive experience. Whereas I feel like if I was in a van, I'd always be like on the go. Which, if someone likes doing that, sounds kind of fun, but I don't know that I'd want to do it while working. Like, I think it would be too stressful for me to be like, oh, what if I like don't have the stuff that I need to do to like do my job? Whereas here, like, I'm just at a desk with a computer. Like I have what I need. It's fine.
Well, and I mean, I think part of his, and like, we could bring Eric on at some point and talk to him. I mean, he may have been on the podcast at some point, but I think part of his ability to do that recently has been he uses Starlink, right? Like rural, right? Being able to actually make the calls and things like that. I think that alleviated a lot of this, like, oh, I have to be in a location and make sure that I have Wi-Fi and everything set up. But between like Starlink and some of the other like cell providers, he's been able to piece it together and make it work. But I'm sure it's stressful, right? Because I know how it is, right? When Ken and I are trying to do the podcast and like Comcast decides to get in the way, right? Like that's happened before. And yeah, it just ruins your day. You're like, crap, like I'm done, right? I'm out. So, but that's cool, right? Like I mean, I'd be interested to see how that flows. It's just, it's cool, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Ken.
No, I was going to ask. So you're going to be here next week. Are you going to have other like community kind of leader folks with you? I assume, or maybe not. Maybe that's incorrect.
I mean, we have a handful of people that are going to be at AppSec DC, both at the party that I sent the link out for, and as well as like at the event in terms of just the booth. And then we also have people speaking. So there's somebody named Kurt who's giving a talk, and then Tanya, who you mentioned earlier and is like very well known. Kurt and Tanya are both giving. They're two separate talks, but yeah, they're both speaking at OWASP DC.
Cool. Well, so okay, that was personally. What about professionally, right? Like, as you look at the industry, as you look at things, and I know we're about out of time, but as you look at the industry, what is it that excites you about the next 6 to 12 months? What is it that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's really exciting is there's been a lot of people over the last couple of years that have started companies, people that I really respected as security practitioners that have felt pains that a lot of other companies have felt starting companies. And I'm really excited to see where those are at in like another 1 to 2 to 3 years, because I think that historically we've had a lot of like really bad vendors, and maybe some of these people I'm talking about will be bad vendors too, but hopefully not, because I do feel like there's a lot of people that like understand what modern security teams need and they're trying to build something for them. And that was definitely a pain that I felt at Segment. I felt like a lot of the vendors when we do evals is like, you are not built for a 500 person company or 300 person company that's using the modern development practices. And I know they're a competitor to Segment, but like when I evaluated SNCC in 2018, they were so much better than like Fortify and like Black Duck and like the other competitors in the space. And I remember like Checkmarks, like they wanted me to install like some Windows shit, and I was like, no, this is like not how this works. Like I'm not installing any. I don't even have Windows. And so I do
have
think
a full
that
talk on this.
Yeah, it's like I think that we need more vendors that can work well with modern security organizations. And I think that there are some that exist currently, but I think that a lot of the stuff that's out there now is meant for kind of a different era of company.
Yeah,
I have a slide I'm trying to pull up here, but it basically shows that. So in 25 years, like it shows the timelines of when things were implemented. I gave this talk like recently. Actually, I have the slide. I'm about to be able to share it. But basically, right around 2013, when Brakeman sort of started to actually make a name, dependency check came out, which meant then that the A9 OWASP category of using known vulnerable components, that timeline was like really impactful for at least some level of recognizing newer tech stack stuff and also like just the fact that like dependencies matter and there's security vulnerabilities there. But, and here it is, but what I noticed was like realistically around 2019, people started to kind of build some companies that were trying to be, that were marketed more towards developers, but still were like security tools essentially at the end of the day, built for security people. But anyways, you could kind of see like the 2011 to 2017 starts to introduce some new ideas into like, like I said, now we're looking at Ruby on Rails, we're looking at JavaScript. There's Sneak gets launched for its like, it's going to end up targeting developers, and then SemGrep in 2019. And so then SemGrep and CodeQL kind of have they're kind of moving more towards integrating truly into a developer kind of workflow, meaning like an SCM of some kind. But in 25 years from, we'll say 1998 till now, that's about been what happened. We started with like AppScan in 98, Web Inspect in 2000. Most of the SaaS stuff started getting most of its traction, or at least started being launched back in 05. A lot of these companies, or actually 02, sorry, put this in the wrong category there. But in any case, just like pretty weird how everything's gone. Most of these companies, like, I don't know, Checkmarks is a good example. I forget, I think AppScan and Web Inspector, another one where they've literally gone through 3 or 4 different big companies they've been purchased by, like that many acquisitions. Yeah. And so this has been, I guess what I'm trying to say is this has been AppSec scanning evolution. And that's, man, I don't know, like not the, anyways, now we're going over time.
Yeah, we do. I mean, my thought on that was the acquisitions seem to hurt the ability to actually react to the market, right? It's like, so it gets acquired by a huge conglomerate, a huge tech company, and I understand they have this like investment mentality that they're going to take in turn and make money off that product, like what they invested in. But part of that is they scale down what Leif and his team is doing to make a product so dynamic, and I mean part of that is like whatever maturity is that they're trying to build into it, the large company mindset. Like, I think there's a number of different things that we could talk about as far as what that, like the results of that or the reasons behind it. But it does leave space for new companies to pop up and actually innovation to occur. So
it's tough. I mean, like even with a company like Twilio, which is a tech company, not a PE company that's trying to just trim it down, improve the margins and like resell it. Like it's hard to combine multiple companies that were never built to work together. I mean, it took us probably 6 months before we could even Slack somebody from Twilio post acquisition. And so I'm not surprised that when you cobble together a bunch of different acquisitions, it's hard to make it feel cohesive. I mean, there was still stuff that like they were trying to get combined with SendGrid, which they bought a year before us. Like Twilio bought SendGrid before they bought Segment. And it's just really hard. I mean, it's like completely different tech stacks, completely different cultures, even combining 2 apps that seem like they should be able to be combined. Like we were both using G Suite, and it was kind of a mess to get like the 2 G Suites combined. And that's one where it's like it feels like Google should have like a better system in place here. But like we had to hire third-party contractors to like write all these crazy scripts to try to make the transition smooth, and there was like still stuff that got like totally borked. And so it's never as easy as it seems. That's just like going back to that theme, like you would expect it to be easy to combine these 2 things, and it's not. Like Slack is a perfect example. It's like there's so many integrations that are tied into Slack that if you were to combine 2 companies' Slacks, like try to get rid of one, not just combine them into an enterprise grid, it would be so hard. There's so many things that send data to Slack or pull data from Slack or whatever, that it's crazy. And that's just one app. That's not even your app. That's a third-party app that is in theory designed to work with acquisitions, let alone trying to combine like the login, like combining the login across like SendGrid, Twilio, and Segment was a huge undertaking. Absolutely massive.
Yep. No easy fix, right? Like, yeah, it's a, yeah. So, I mean, so we see this reasons why it happens. And, we might have to do another episode just on that, right? Just talk through what that actually is.
I have had conversations where we've shared it on this. I've shared a couple of those conversations on this podcast where people just flat out got whole really cool, innovative ideas on their products killed through the process of like acquisitions where, someone came in, they're like, yeah, no, this is really cool. Nice. But guess what? It costs us too much of my time and money. And like we're condensing and unifying goals and teams, and no, that's getting killed off. And so anyway, it's like 25 years. SemGrep, here's what I'll say on this note. My biggest gripe with the 25 years of evolution is that it never keeps up with the pace of adoption by engineers. It will never, not naturally, naturally it won't. With the exception, I think one thing that's really nice with SemGrep is that you cover so many different languages, so it's very easy to start writing rules or building community rule or using community rules or paying for the engine and using SemGrep rules to cover those new technologies that get adopted. So
you heard it here first. SemGrep completely future proof according to Ken. great value.
Great value. Well, I mean, I think it goes back to this idea of like what Ken's getting at here is like getting out of the way as a security tool, right? Letting developers choose how they use it rather than trying to dictate to them how it should go. And
kind of,
part of that sign up process.
So just kind of, but to be clear, like, no, what I really mean is if you pay a bunch of money for check marks or you pay a bunch of money for Sneak or whatever, and you only get 3 out of the there's 7 new things that came out and are being adopted in your org, like you're completely lost. You don't have a tool for it. That's what I really mean, right? That's what I'm trying to say. Yep. So as a practitioner, if I have something that's flexible, I guess what I'm trying to say is the last 25 years have been very rigid. I think we need to go towards a world where things are very, very flexible. I think SemGrep's one early attempt at that is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And flexibility is really going to be the name of the game for our industry is my personal take on everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to ask developers to own all the security stuff and be able to make security decisions and shift left and, whatever, it's like you need stuff that they can use and that's like relatively easy for them to use because we've added so many things to what a developer needs to do. It's like you need to understand infrastructure, you need to understand security, you need to understand APM, you need to understand databases. Like if any of those things is too hard, the developers are naturally not going to do a very good job at it. And it's not because they're dumb or anything like that. It's just that they have so many responsibilities that being a journeyman at these 5 different things that are all like not super similar to each other is pretty hard. And so that's, I think that's where a lot of these industries that are like software engineering adjacent need to go is like, how do we make this stuff as easy as possible for developers to make the right decisions autonomously?
Yep. Good. Well, I mean, I think that's a good thought to go ahead and close out the episode on.
I didn't want to spoil it.
Yeah,
that's great.
Exactly. That's a good place to put a bow on it. Leif, we appreciate you coming on again. Right. We'll have to not wait 3 years for the next follow up. Especially as we see what else is coming out of SemGrep and what else you've got going on. Keep in touch. And Ken, any other final thoughts before we close today out?
Just thank you for your time. I know you're a busy person and appreciate you coming on here and allowing us to pick your brain and share your story and let the listeners hear it as well. And thank you to listeners.
Appreciate you having me on here and really looking forward to catching up with you and anyone else that's around for DC.
Yeah, cool. Me too. Cool.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining today. Join us on Slack, and if you've got additional questions, we'll filter them through, and otherwise we'll see everybody on Friday, hopefully on the live panel. Get your questions in for that before and watch for guests as well. All right. Thanks, everybody.